I stayed at the Red Emblem Hotel and lived to tell about it. Sort of. It was a small boutique hotel, but it was the one everyone in town recommended. The 3 Red Emblem Hotel business cards in my pocket testified to that. Each was handed to me by a local, gushing about how I absolutely had to spend a night there. Oh, and showing the card at check-in apparently entitled me to a free breakfast. It was late when I arrived, close to 2 a.m., so the Victorian-era aesthetic in the lobby, which may have been charming in daylight, instead seemed ripped out of some cliched horror movie. "Hi there, are you checking in this evening?" the woman behind the front desk asked. There wasn't a chance I could muster the same energy as Emma, a name I gleaned from the tag on her shirt, but I gave it my best effort. Yep, from talking to people around town, sounds like I'd be crazy to stay anywhere else. She didn't respond right away. In fact, she paused long enough for me to notice her left eye slowly droop downward, as though succumbing to the force of gravity. Her right eye, however, remained fixed on me. Her too loud and too shrill laughter broke the silence. Absolutely, we've definitely earned a reputation here. It was late, I was tired, and I assumed that despite her upbeat tone, Emma was feeling much the same. So it was easy to chalk up that bizarre moment to a combination of my and her delirium. Emma continued. "So we actually have only one room left? It's a 2-queen. Is that all right?" I really didn't care what room I got, as long as it had a bed. I started to say as much, but barely got a word out before I was interrupted. "Excuse me, just a moment." Emma stepped out from behind the front desk and called out to a girl I hadn't noticed before. "Layla? Layla, come here." The girl stood at the top of a staircase, staring down to wherever it led. Since her back was to me, all I could make out is that she had long, dark hair and wore a blue nightgown. Emma approached her and called out again, "Layla?" The girl's only reply was a wheezing sound and a slight twitch of her right arm. Noticing my confusion, Emma turned for a moment and explained in a quiet voice, "She's the owner's daughter. She has a little issue with sleepwalking sometimes. It's nothing to worry about." Emma grabbed one of Layla's arms and slowly led her downstairs. The wheezing continued. At that point, it was unclear to me what made the hotel so popular. I imagined someone trying to sell the place. "Oh, you'll absolutely love it. If the lazy eye doesn't draw you in, the creepy sleepwalking chick will do it for sure." Once Emma returned to the front desk, she handed me 2 room keys and offered, "Call down if you need anything." A few minutes later, I stood in front of room 1109. I held a key card to the sensor and heard a click as it unlocked. The room was pretty basic, but seemed clean enough. 2 queen beds, a small desk, a TV, and a window with a view of the highway. A highway which, the next day, was supposed to lead me to my final destination. At 3 a.m., I woke up startled from a nightmare I can't remember. The disorientation, which normally cleared within seconds, lingered as I noticed how close I was to the window. In a hotel with 2 beds, I always took the one further from the window. Not for any particular reason, it was just habit. Had I been so tired, I unconsciously chose the other bed? Did I switch in the middle of the night? And why was my whole body so damn itchy? Things got really weird when I turned away from the window to face the other bed. It was dark, but I could make out the unmistakable outline of a person under the covers and a head on the pillow. Any other night, I'm sure I would have realized my delirious mind mistook a suitcase or some other object for a person. That night, however, I was at the Red Emblem Hotel. Whatever was under those covers moved. confirming that there was someone in that bed. I held my breath and stared. I debated shouting, turning the lights on, running out of the room, preemptively attacking, or some combination of all four. I figured I should at least get out of bed. I slowly and quietly began lifting the covers. As I did so, something felt off. There was unexpected weight to the sheets. Too late, I remembered the water bottle I had carelessly tossed on the bed earlier. I watched the nearly full bottle roll and fall to the carpeted floor. The sound it made was quiet, but was it loud enough to wake someone up? I snapped my attention back to the intruder in the other bed and saw that, yes, it was loud enough. The dark figure was propped up on its right elbow, having turned to face me. It was still too dark to make out any details, but I could tell it was staring. I quickly flicked my left hand at the switch above my headboard to turn on the reading light. It wouldn't be much, but I was sure it would be enough to see who or what was in that bed. I don't know what startled me more, what I saw in that bed, or its screaming the moment there was light. Simply put, the man I saw in that bed was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me, and he was terrified. His shouting seemed involuntary, as though his mind were breaking. He threw the covers off himself and scrambled backwards to be as far away from me as possible. He quickly hit the wall the bed was pressed against, but continued digging his heels into the mattress, as though trying to push through that wall. The shouting continued while tears streamed from each of his eyes, wide with fear. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I knew I wanted out of that room. So I finally jumped out of bed and ran for the door. That meant running past the full-body mirror on the closet. Although it was still dark, the light from the reading lamp was just enough to see that something was very wrong. The almost animalistic screaming behind me continued as I flipped the main switch, finally illuminating the room. I saw the horror that stared back at me in the mirror, and finally understood the terrified shouting behind me. I was a freak show, rotting skin barely clinging to the wet bone and muscle underneath, head caved in on one side, an eye bulging from its socket, and brain remnants struggling to remain in their proper place. The worms are what got me. Through punctured lungs, shattered vocal cords, and a rotting throat, I attempted to shout. The sound which finally escaped was as grotesque as the body it came from, a grave howl which filled the room and surrounding halls. Somehow, between panic and existential terror, I took notice of the fact that the other me in the room had gone completely silent. I turned and saw that he'd left the bed and quietly followed me. He stood still, except for a slight twitch in his right arm. If seeing my form had broken his mind, hearing my scream utterly obliterated it. There was no life in his eyes, or were they my eyes? The grotesque creature, a disgusting mockery of the human form, shouted again, then sprinted in my direction. My fear quickly dissipated as I realized it was running not at me, but at the window behind me. The monster threw itself into the glass, howling again as the window shattered around it. The howling grew quieter as that thing presumably fell to the ground and ended its miserable existence. It was suddenly quiet, and for what felt like the first time in hours, I took a breath. I slowly walked to the window and peeked my head over the edge. It was far away, but I could just make out its shattered remains in the parking lot. I left the window and stood in the middle of the room. It was hard to think. It felt as though I'd been on a freight train that suddenly crashed into an immovable wall. I'd gone from an adrenaline-fueled struggle between fight or flight to total calm and silence. My mind hadn't yet recovered from the trip. From outside, I heard a distant howling. It was quieter and further away, but I recognized it. That thing was still clinging to what I hesitate to call life. I continued to stand still for I have no idea how long. It could have been minutes, or it could have been hours. Eventually, awareness returned to me as though I was shaken awake by an unseen force. My entire body shook uncontrollably and I began to sob. It was not a result of sadness or fear, but simply an automatic response. Maybe it was shock. Needless to say, my first night in the Red Emblem Hotel was not a pleasant one. I would later learn that what I'd experienced that night was my reorientation. The experience was a little different for everyone, but it was an unavoidable and painful side effect of beginning your stay. This was all explained to me by Emma once I'd finally gathered my wits enough to leave the room. She also explained that I wouldn't be leaving the Red Emblem Hotel that day. It wasn't as simple as that. There's a lot you have to go through if you want to end your stay there. I didn't take that news well, but at least they did serve me that free breakfast.